everything. If we can come to you, Dr. Weinrev, in terms of barriers, so what do you think are kind of the biggest barriers to people within the community to perhaps participating in clinical trials or other research studies for that matter?
Well, I think Cindy touched on some of the most important ones, but I think, again, one has to look at Gaucher disease in terms of its clinical variability, and a disease which can become acutely manifest during infancy or childhood, ranging to a disease where, for whatever reason, people are not diagnosed, sometimes because of lack of severity, until they're quite older. So again, trying to address each of these different types of groups. Sometimes, of course, with the children, you also have to address parents, and with older people, you may have children, that you have to address who are advisors. So there is, there's a different, I think, need to look at this. In type 1 disease, I think the real challenge is, as Cindy mentioned, the patient who is pretty set in their ways. They've been on therapy. The therapy has largely been successful. Again, we know that there are some failures of enzyme therapy, and we still don't know enough yet about substrate therapy. But although it looks so far like it's doing all right, and such people may be somewhat reluctant, or many of them, as we learned with the substrate therapy trials, will be reluctant to change, horse in midstream. The ones who have the greatest symptoms, and again, that's why I think the trial is important, that is looking for people who do have unmet needs, although that is a burden for the trial itself, because again, the sicker the patient is, we don't know how much gain there's likely to be had from the treatment. Whereas if you start off with the mild patient, the chances are you may be more successful. But again, I think people who are having overt symptoms in the type 1 area, or who are having a lot of trouble just taking their medications daily or every couple of weeks, in the sense of the IVs, which is probably a small number, but such individuals certainly might be interested in what would turn out to be a one-time, once-in-a-life treatment. Again, I think it's important to mention the trial doesn't involve, I presume, any expense to the individuals who are participating, except possibly even in terms of transportation to the site, but even that sometimes gets covered. But so again, I think it's premature to start worrying about the cost of the treatment down the road. I think that's going to require a whole social adjustment of how we look at cost of treatment when you're actually talking about a one-time treatment, which may last an entire life and obviate the need for expensive ongoing treatment for many, many years. So again, that's a whole issue in the socioeconomics of healthcare, which is being addressed, has to be addressed in terms of gene therapy. But I wouldn't worry about that so much at this point. I think the other thing that patients need to understand is, again, these trials are not likely to involve initially a large number of individuals. Most of the gene therapy trials take small cohorts. They test a few patients. Sometimes they'll advance the dose of the vector based on, and because safety is, of course, one of the main goals of this trial, other than efficacy, but establishment of safety is also very important. So they tend to be very carefully monitored, especially for side effects or immune reactions in the case of AAV. I don't know, Jeff, if the trial, I didn't see the whole trial, but if it's involves some suppression with steroids or something like that, which is very common in AAV. So I think, again,
I'm mindful of time, so I think rather than
I don't want to drag it out. I just want to remind everybody the first successful trial for ERT with what was then Ceridase involved 12 patients. It didn't involve hundreds of patients. And I think that model is proven, at least in Gaucher disease, to be very, very valid and useful.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, it leads us on really nicely, actually, to the topic of access to treatment. So if I can kind of come back to you on that, Jeff, in terms of, obviously, there's a responsibility with all of these new therapies and drugs and everything being developed to really make sure that there's something in place in terms of access. So what would you say are kind of the approaches the industry should be taking to ensure that access to these novel therapies and gene therapies can actually be achieved at approval stage?
Yeah, well, it starts with making the general community aware of new types of treatments. And, many people just, for various reasons, don't follow breakthroughs in science and technology. So, and neither do many of the physicians. So first of all, it's it's communicating potential breakthroughs in the scientific and in the general patient community. I'd say the next big problem that needs to be dealt with is making genotyping available across all states. This is particularly relevant in the neurological forms like type 2 Gaucher disease. These are children who are born, and if they don't have, if they're not disabled at birth, they're disabled not long after birth, and families really struggle trying to get a diagnosis. They go from hospital to, oftentimes they're in the hospital, but they'll go from hospital to hospital, doctor to doctor, to try to figure out why the child is not developing normally. And it's really sad because a simple genetic test, this is just a simple blood test, could be performed and a diagnosis could be made. There are some states that do genetic testing on all newborn children, but most states do not. So I think in terms of really ridding the world of type 2 Gaucher disease, we need to have a much stronger and robust genetic testing across the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cindy, what do you think the role of the patient organization would be in terms of those kind of reimbursement and access conversations?
Yeah, so it's such an incredibly important question, and newborn screening in states when it comes to gene therapy is incredibly important. There's very few states right now that have newborn screening. I think there's only 4 or 5. And so from a patient organization, we have a wonderful advocacy program where we are working with some experts, and we reach out to the FDA. We reach out state by state to legislators, to anything we possibly can. We get the patient community involved in each state to be active in trying to get these laws changed. Unfortunately, you have to do state to state, so there's many to do, and it takes several years in a state to really be heard and to try to make change. We also partner with a lot of the drug companies, so that they have entire functions in their companies that are working on stuff like this. So we partner with them, and we find the patients to help do the speaking to be heard and to try to make these changes.